I turned 36 on the night my parents spit on me in front of our entire family. It was supposed to be the Lowell Purity Banquet, one of those rituals my parents loved pretending was a noble tradition. The chandeliers glittered above a table lined with silver cutlery, and people who shared my blood but none of my loyalty. I had barely sat down when my mother Vivian lifted her wine glass and smiled the way women smile before something cruel. She said that every family has imperfections, and that ours had carried one for far too long. I felt the room tighten as heads began to tilt in my direction. Then she said the word she had rehearsed for years. Defect. My father Reginald sat beside her, tapping one finger on the tablecloth like he was waiting for applause. When none came, he stood, grabbed my chin with 2 fingers and spit at my cheek. He said I was no longer welcome in his house, or at his table, or in anything that bore the Lowell name. The room went still. No one breathed. No one protested. My cousins stared at their plates. My uncles avoided my eyes. Even the waitstaff froze. I heard someone clear their throat as if embarrassed on my behalf, but no one spoke for me. It was a family execution carried out with perfect etiquette. I pushed back my chair, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and stood without giving them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I felt the sting on my cheek where my father's spit had landed, but I refused to wipe it away. If they wanted a spectacle, they were not getting it. I walked out of that dining room like I was leaving the scene of a burning house. The hallway outside smelled like roses and old wood polish. My footsteps echoed as I headed for the front door. Behind me, I heard murmurs, soft and embarrassed, the kind people whisper when they know they should have done something and chose silence instead. I did not look back, not when I stepped out into the cold Napa Valley air, not when the heavy front doors closed behind me with a final thud. My car waited beneath the old cypress trees, the ones my mother used to say were older than most Lowells. The driveway lamps cast long shadows across the gravel. As I reached for the door handle, I felt something tighten in my chest, a sensation that someone was watching me. I turned slowly toward the gate. A man stood just beyond the stone archway, tall, still, partly hidden by the darkness. He wasn't smoking or pretending to check a phone. He just watched me, unmoving, as if he had been waiting for me to step outside. A breeze passed between us, rustling the leaves, and for a moment I thought he might speak. Then I blinked, and he was gone. No footsteps, no shadow, just gone. My pulse quickened. I climbed into the driver's seat and shut the door. The interior smelled faintly of leather and lavender cleaner. I sat for a moment gripping the steering wheel while my heart settled. It was quiet except for the hum of crickets in the vineyard rows beyond the estate walls. Then I saw it. A black envelope tucked beneath my windshield wiper. Crisp, untouched by dew. Not there when I had arrived. I stepped out again, the gravel crunching under my heels. I pulled the envelope free, and the moment I felt its weight, something shifted inside me. My name was written across the front in silver ink. Marina Lowell. No flourish, no initials, just my name. Inside was a heavy folded document and a metal key that looked as old as the castle-like mansions you see on the East Coast. My hands shook slightly as I opened the document under the driveway lamp. It was a deed, a legal transfer of ownership, Coronado Isle Kingdom, $850 million in assets. A private territory recognized under an old autonomous charter, a castle, a governance council, land stretching across the island's cliffs and forest. And the owner named on every line was me. My breath fogged in the cold air. I stared at the signature at the bottom. William Lowell II. My uncle who disappeared in 2018 without any explanation. Rumors said he ran off with someone. Others said he owed debts. Some said my father had driven him away. No one knew the truth. $850 million, an entire island territory. Given to me, a birthday present from a ghost. The night felt colder suddenly. I looked back toward the gate. The man was not there. But the feeling he had left behind pressed like a hand against my spine. I got into my car again and locked the doors. My father's spit was still drying on my cheek. My mother's word was still ringing in my ears. Defect, unworthy, cast out. Inside my lap lay a deed worth more than the entire Lowell estate. Something my father never wanted me to have. Something he had not expected me to receive. Something someone had planned long before I realized I was in danger. My phone buzzed beside me. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. You need to leave now. Another buzz. They will not let this go. I swallowed hard, gripping the key in my hand. It felt warm, almost alive. For a moment, I sat completely still. The only sound my heart beat in my ears. I had walked out of my parents' house with nothing but my dignity. And yet tonight, someone had placed an entire kingdom in my hands. The headlights of a car turned onto the main road in the distance. Slow, approaching, not one I recognized. I started the engine. The car hummed awake. I backed slowly down the driveway, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror. The other vehicle slowed near the gate but did not enter. My pulse steadied just enough for me to breathe. I turned onto the main road and drove into the dark, my fingers still wrapped around the old key. I did not know yet why my uncle had chosen me. I did not know why the island existed or why he had hidden it. I did not know why someone had been watching from the shadows. But I knew this much. My parents had thrown me away. Someone else had been waiting for me to finally be free. I kept driving until the estate lights vanished behind me, and the road opened into the empty fields beyond the valley. Only then did I let the weight of the night settle across me. $850 million, an entire island, a kingdom, and a family secret my father clearly never wanted me to discover. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Something was beginning. I could feel it. Something that had waited years for this exact moment. And whatever it was, it had already found me. I drove through the empty valley roads until the sky began to lighten at the edges. By the time I reached the interstate, I had made a decision without speaking it aloud. I was not going back to my apartment or anywhere familiar. I was going to the one person who might understand and what had been dropped in my lap. Elias Ward had handled every trust, estate document, and private contract my mother ever touched before she died. If there was an answer, he would have it. His office in downtown Sacramento sat in a restored brick building tucked between a wine bar and an old courthouse. The city was quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is waiting for something. I parked along the curb and walked up the stone steps, still clutching the envelope, still feeling the shape of the old key in my coat pocket. The lobby lights were off, but a single lamp glowed behind a frosted door on the second floor. I pressed the buzzer out of habit, even though I knew no one kept hours at dawn. The lock clicked and Elias opened the door himself. He looked older than I remembered, hair more gray than blonde now, lines deeper around his eyes, but his expression held the same steady calm I had relied on decades ago, when my mother died and my father had no patience for my grief. Elias stepped back to let me inside and stared at me for a long moment before he spoke. I knew something had happened. You only come here when the ground moves under your feet. Sit down, Marina. Tell me everything. His voice was gentle but firm. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk and placed the envelope on the polished wood between us. He reached for it the way people reach for something that might burn. He unfolded the deed, read the name on the first line, and went still. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge I had never heard. This is real. My God, he signed it. I asked him what it meant. I asked him why my uncle had left me an island worth more than my father's entire corporate portfolio. Elias rubbed a hand over his mouth and stood, pacing to the window and back again. He kept glancing at the key like it was the missing piece in a puzzle he had been working on for years. Your mother knew this was coming. I do not mean the banquet or what they said to you. I mean the way your father treats anything he cannot control. Leona created a contingency trust shortly before she died, one that only activates if you are formally rejected by the Lowell household. He tapped the deed. That banquet did exactly that. Whether they understood it or not, they triggered the succession protocol your uncle and your mother built in secret. I felt the room tilt slightly. I asked him why my mother would ever prepare something like that, why she had not told me. Elias sat again and looked at me with an expression that carried more sorrow than I was ready to hold. Your mother feared your father in ways you were too young to understand. She learned things about his dealings that would have destroyed him if they came out. She tried to expose him once. After that, she trusted almost no one, except William. The two of them planned for the possibility that you might one day need a refuge, something safe, something he could not take from you. He slid a binder from a lower drawer and set it beside the deed. Inside were signatures and stamps I recognized from years ago, when my mother's estate was settled. Only now I saw sections I had never been allowed to read. Terms that made little sense until this moment. Succession, protective transfer, legal autonomy under historical charter. Elias pointed to one line. You were never meant to inherit Lowell Holdings. Your father wanted that path closed. But Coronado Isle has nothing to do with him. It follows your mother's lineage. You are the only living descendant. I stared at the deed again, at my own name printed so cleanly, so confidently, as if the person who signed it had believed I would be ready. I asked Elias about William, where he had gone, why he vanished. Elias shook his head. He did not vanish by choice. Something happened while he was trying to finish the final stages of the trust. I never learned the full truth. But I do know he left instructions that only the rightful heir could activate the last part of the succession. His movements became erratic in the year before he disappeared. Your father tried to have him declared mentally unfit, but the courts denied it. William left before anyone could force him to hand over documents. A cold ache spread through my chest. For 30 years, I had accepted the stories my father told about my mother and her side of the family. I never questioned the silence. I never asked who William really was. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I had carried blindly without knowing there was a picture underneath. I asked Elias if my father knew about the island. He hesitated. He suspected something existed, but he never found proof. Your mother hid things in plain sight, and William buried the rest. Lowell Holdings tried to subpoena records after your mother died, but everything related to Coronado was sealed. Your father cannot touch any of this. Not legally, not if you claim it. Claim it? The words felt heavy and strange. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the key. It was shaped like an antique, intricate grooves and markings, but weighted like something meant for modern locks. I asked Elias if he knew what it opened. He said no, but the last time he saw it, my mother had been carrying it on a chain around her neck. There is something else you should know, he said. Your father will not react well to losing control, especially not tonight, after what they did to you. Losing you weakens his standing with shareholders. If he discovers you have something of value, especially something connected to a territory your mother protected, he will come for it. My stomach tightened. I thought of the man at the gate and the car that slowed near the estate as I left. I thought of how quickly the message had come after I found the envelope. Someone knew. Someone was already watching. Elias leaned forward, lowering his voice. Whatever you decide, you cannot stay here. Go somewhere safe. Then go to the island. Everything you need to understand will be there. I asked him whether I was ready for something like that. He almost smiled. Your mother did not raise a woman who breaks easily. I let that settle inside me for a moment. Then I stood and picked up the envelope. Elias walked me to the door, pausing as if he wanted to say more but thought better of it. His last words before I left surprised me. There are people who have waited a long time for you to step into this. Not everyone on that island is your enemy. The morning sun had risen by the time I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The city was awake now, cars passing, shop lights blinking on, the familiar sounds of a world that had no idea what had just shifted in mine. I walked toward my car with the envelope pressed against my chest, feeling the weight of the deed, the key, the truth. I unlocked the door and slid inside. For a moment, I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and let the quiet wrap around me. My father had cut me out of the family in front of everyone. My mother had prepared for that outcome before I was even old enough to remember her voice. My uncle had died or disappeared trying to protect something meant for me. I lifted my head and exhaled. The decision was already made. I was going to Coronado Isle. I was going to see what my mother and William had built, what they had died or vanished trying to preserve. Whatever waited for me there had been set in motion long before tonight. I started the engine. The key in my pocket felt warm against my palm. Nothing in my life was ever going back to what it had been. And I finally understood. It was never meant to. I drove south until the interstate thinned into 2 lanes and the farmland gave way to low rolling hills. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a soft gold, and the coastline came into view through breaks in the trees. The charter pilot Elias had arranged told me to meet him at a private dock outside Monterey. I followed the directions down a narrow road lined with cypress trees that bent toward the water like old guardians. The dock stretched out into a quiet inlet where the waves rolled gently against the pylons. A small seaplane sat tethered at the far end, its white paint catching the last light of the day. A man in a navy jacket stepped out as I approached. He was tall, steady in the way of someone who had spent most of his life around wind and water. He introduced himself as Captain Hale for the flight, though everyone called him Jonah. He checked my name, asked no unnecessary questions, and gestured me aboard with a respectful nod. The simplicity of it all made me feel like this journey had been prepared long before I had agreed to take it. Inside the cabin, the leather seats were worn but clean, and the windows looked out over a vast stretch of Pacific blue. As Jonah started the engine, the seaplane vibrated with a low hum that settled into the rhythm of the water below. We glided forward, gathered speed, and rose into the air in one smooth climb. The coastline shrank behind us as the water opened up into miles of open sea. Jonah spoke over the headset, his voice calm and even. Coronado Isle sits about 30 miles offshore. Weather is clear. You should have a smooth landing. I asked him if he had flown there before. He hesitated for a second, then said he had, but only under very specific instructions. The last time was 6 years ago, shortly after William Lowell vanished. The name hovered between us like a question neither of us wanted to press. The flight was quiet. I watched the water shift from deep blue to slate gray as clouds gathered along the horizon. The key in my coat pocket felt heavier with each passing minute. I thought of the deed and the signature that should not have existed. I thought of my mother and the secrets she had carried alone. And I thought of what my father might be doing at that very moment. Whether he had already realized what he had triggered by humiliating me in front of the family. The plane dipped slightly as the island came into view. At first I saw only a dark line along the water, then cliffs rising out of the waves, and a castle-like structure perched on the highest ridge. The architecture was old, the kind brought over by settlers who believed stone could outlast storms and wars. But the structure beneath it looked reinforced with modern steel. It was an odd combination of past and present, history and vigilance. Jonah circled once, then guided the plane toward a narrow dock sheltered in a cove. A man stood waiting at the end of it. His posture was straight, hands clasped behind his back, as if he had been trained in some old-world discipline. He did not wave. He did not step forward. He simply waited. We touched down onto water with a soft splash. Jonah secured the ropes, then helped me onto the dock. The breeze carried the scent of pine and salt and something older, like earth that had been left untouched for generations. The man studied me with a level gaze that was neither cold nor warm, only observant. He introduced himself as John Hale, caretaker of Coronado Isle, and said he had served the lineage of my mother for many years. His voice held the kind of steadiness that made me feel like someone had been expecting me long before I knew I was coming. John asked if I had brought the key. I nodded but kept my hand in my pocket. Something in his expression softened, as if that answer alone confirmed something. He led me up a stone path carved into the cliffside. The climb was gradual but constant, winding between tall evergreens and sloping rock faces. The sound of the waves grew distant as we ascended, replaced by the whistle of wind moving through narrow gaps in the stone. When we reached the top, the full view of Coronado Castle unfolded before me. It was larger than I expected, rising from the cliff like it had been carved out of the rock rather than built upon it. Thick walls framed by Gothic arches and narrow windows, a bell tower that caught the fading sunlight, and behind it all, the sound of generators and quiet mechanical pulses hinted at systems far more advanced than the exterior suggested. Inside the entrance hall, warm air greeted me. Fireplaces lined with dark stone flickered with orange light. The scent of cedar drifted from somewhere deeper in the castle. John guided me through a corridor where portraits hung in careful rows. Many faces looked unfamiliar, though the shape of their eyes or the tilt of their jaws carried echoes of my own. As we continued, John spoke in a measured tone. Your mother spent her early years here. She left when she married your father, but she never severed her ties to the island. She and William worked together to preserve it when the Lowell family began focusing on corporate power rather than heritage. They believed Coronado should remain untouched, protected by those who understood its history. I asked him why she never brought me here. John paused beside a tall archway and looked at me with something close to sorrow. She intended to. She planned a visit for you when you were 8. Days before the trip, she died. After that, William did everything he could to keep the island from falling into the wrong hands. He led me into a circular chamber with walls built entirely of stone. At the center of the room sat a metal pedestal shaped like a column. On top of it rested a recessed plate with intricate grooves. John pointed to it. This is the succession hall. Only the rightful heir can activate it. The protocols are old, far older than anything connected to Lowell Holdings. They were designed to protect the one who carries Leona's lineage. I asked him what would happen if I placed the key into the plate. John said the initial sequence would unlock documents stored deeper within the castle, documents my mother and William left for me. But he warned me not to rush. Once activated, the process could not be undone. Before I could respond, John lifted his head slightly, listening to something I could not hear. He walked to a wall panel and pressed a button. A screen slid out from behind a wooden frame. Grainy radar images flickered across it. A vessel hovered just at the edge of the island's maritime boundary. No identification, no navigation lights. John narrowed his eyes. This is not a supply boat. Someone is studying the topography. He zoomed the image and pointed to faint lines traced over the cliffs. They are mapping approach routes. A cold sensation spread through me. I asked if it could be my father or someone from Lowell Holdings. John closed the panel and turned back to me. Your father has always wanted control. Losing it does not sit well with him. But we cannot assume anything yet. Coronado has enemies outside your family too. For now, we stay cautious. We stepped out of the chamber and back into the corridor. The portraits watched us as we passed. I felt their eyes on me, like a lineage I had never known was weighing my presence. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows as if urging me to choose. The key felt heavy in my pocket, the promise of answers and danger bound in one object. John walked a few steps ahead, silent, giving me time to absorb everything. The island held stories my mother never told me, secrets she died trying to protect. Whatever waited in the deeper chambers of the castle was no longer a distant mystery. It was a heartbeat pulsing beneath the floor, calling me forward. We reached the landing at the top of a staircase. John paused, turned to me, and waited. I knew then that the next step would change far more than my understanding of the past. It would change the direction of everything still ahead. John waited for me at the top of the stairs, his expression calm but expectant, as if he knew exactly what I was wrestling with inside. I followed him down the hallway, my footsteps softer than his on the worn stone floor. The castle felt alive in a way I could not explain, like the walls carried breath and memory, and something older than my family's name. Every turn brought a draft of cool air scented with pine, and the faint touch of salt from the sea far below. John stopped in front of a heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron studs. He rested his hand on the latch, but did not open it yet. This room holds the early records your mother kept, things she believed you might one day need. They are not the full truth, but enough to help you understand why she feared your father. The latch clicked and the door swung inward. The room beyond was narrow and lined with shelves built directly into the stone. Books, ledgers, and folders filled every inch. Dust motes drifted lazily in the shaft of light coming from a single arched window. The space felt untouched, as if no one had entered since my mother last set foot inside. I stepped forward slowly, running my fingers along the spine of a leather-bound journal embossed with a small crown symbol. John watched me, his hands clasped behind his back. Your mother kept meticulous notes, he said. She understood the responsibility tied to her lineage. She also understood the enemies that came with it. I opened the journal and felt a tremor travel through me. My mother's handwriting curved across the page, confident and neat. Seeing her words after so many years felt like hearing her voice rise from a place I had never visited. I read several lines without speaking. She wrote about financial discrepancies she noticed in Lowell Holdings years before her death. Shell accounts, transfers that did not add up, a pattern her husband could not explain. She suspected involvement with a weapons contractor in Nevada, though she had not yet found proof. I felt my chest tighten. My mother had been investigating my father. She had been trying to stop him. I remembered her warmth, the way she tucked my hair behind my ears, the quiet patience she carried like a second heartbeat. It broke something in me to imagine her moving through her days with fear she kept hidden from me. John guided me to the next shelf where a stack of documents sat bound with twine. He untied the knot and handed me the first packet. It was a contract proposal. The signatures made my throat close. William's on one side, my father's on the other. The wording was vague but pointed toward an attempted transfer of autonomy rights for Coronado Isle. If signed fully, the island would have lost its special status as an independent territory. It would have become a piece of Lowell Holdings. I looked up at John. Why would he want this? Why would he risk so much? Control, he said. Your father believes that power comes from owning everything within reach. Coronado was out of his reach. The more your mother resisted him, the more determined he became to take what she protected. My hands shook as I turned the pages. Another document showed changes to inheritance terms that would allow Lowell Holdings to claim stewardship of Coronado if the legitimate heir were compromised or declared unfit. The wording made my stomach drop. Declared unfit. I thought of the banquet, the word defect rolling off my mother's tongue like a rehearsed performance. It had not been a moment of cruelty. It had been a trigger, a legal maneuver. They had pushed me out to take the island. My voice sounded smaller than I intended when I asked John if he believed my mother's death had been an accident. He did not answer right away. He closed the binder, walked to the window, and looked out toward the water where the dark shape of the unknown vessel still floated in the distance. Your mother feared your father more than she ever admitted aloud. She documented every suspicion, every strange meeting, every threat. The last weeks before she died, she told William she felt watched constantly. Her death was recorded as a car accident, but the vehicle report was sealed. William suspected tampering, but he could not prove it in time. The air felt too thin. I pressed a hand over my mouth and breathed slowly until the room steadied around me. My mother had died trying to protect me and the island. My father had lied for decades. And somewhere in this castle, William had left the rest of the story waiting for me to uncover. John stepped closer and spoke softly. There is more. Your mother and William believed you would need additional records to understand the full threat. Those files require a secondary key and your mother's identification markers. What you hold in your pocket is only the beginning. I touched the shape of the old key through my coat pocket. It felt warm again, as if responding to the truth in the room. Before either of us could speak further, a soft chime echoed through the stone corridor outside. John stiffened. That is the maritime alert. Someone is moving closer. We hurried into the hall, and John pressed his palm to a small panel near the wall. The screen flickered to life, showing the vessel that had lingered earlier. It was closer now, cutting slow arcs near the southern edge of the island. No lights, no insignia, no registration. They are not trying to enter, John murmured. They are studying, mapping, testing our response time. My stomach twisted with the knowledge that someone out there might be acting on my father's behalf. I imagined Reginald discovering what he had lost overnight, and the rage that would follow. The kind of rage that did not stop until it swallowed everything in its path. John shut the panel and faced me with quiet resolve. You must continue your mother's work. The castle holds answers she could not reveal before she died. But you should also understand this. Once you access the deeper records, the island will recognize you as its rightful heir. That means others will recognize it too. His words settled heavily over me. I felt the weight of responsibility, of fear, of a lineage I had never understood pulling me forward like a tide. But beneath all that, something steadier grew, a sense of purpose I had never felt before, a sense that my mother had left me more than sorrow. She had left me a path. John walked ahead, leading me back toward the central hall. I followed slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. The portraits lining the walls seemed sharper in the dim light. Eyes that looked carved from my past, watching me as if judging whether I was worthy of what they had fought to protect. At the landing, John paused again. He turned slightly as if listening for something beyond the walls. The next chamber requires both your courage and your mother's proof, he said. Nothing inside it is simple. Some of it may hurt to learn, but she believed you were strong enough to carry the truth she could not. A gust of wind rattled the narrow windows, and the faint rumble of distant waves reached us from far below. The island felt vast and alive, charged with a history I had not known belonged to me. I placed my hand on the railing, drawing a steady breath. I knew that once I stepped into the chamber John spoke of, I would cross a threshold my father never wanted me to approach, a threshold my mother died trying to defend. John opened the next door slowly, and I stepped forward into the shadows of a past that had been waiting for me to return. The room I stepped into was wider than I expected, with a long stone table running down the center and shelves climbing nearly to the arched ceiling. A narrow row of sconces cast a soft gold light across the dust that floated in slow spirals. For a moment, it felt as if I had walked into a place the world had forgotten existed. John guided me toward the far end of the table, where several folders lay stacked. But before he could speak, footsteps echoed from the corridor behind us. They were brisk, purposeful, and unmistakably human. John moved in front of me, instinctively shielding me, but the figure who appeared in the doorway was not a threat. It was Helena Ward. Her hair was windblown, her coat unbuttoned as if she had walked here faster than she meant to. She paused at the entrance, breath unsteady, and then met my eyes with a mixture of urgency and something like relief. "I hope I am not intruding," she said. "Elias told me you had left for the island and that you needed help. I had to come." I stepped toward her, still adjusting to the sight of someone from the outside world standing inside this hidden chamber. I asked how she had gotten here so quickly. She lifted her phone slightly. "Your uncle left a contact number years ago. A number that only activated if any part of the Coronado Trust protocol was triggered. When I heard what happened last night, I knew where you were heading." John seemed less surprised than I expected. He nodded politely to Helena, then glanced at me as if waiting for my reaction. I told him to let her stay. Helena walked farther into the room and set her bag on the table. Her hands shook as she unzipped it and pulled out a thick envelope edged with wear. She pressed it gently toward me. "This is half of William's testimony. The other half was stored somewhere on this island. I never knew where. He gave this to me 10 years ago when I was investigating Lowell Holdings. He said I would know when it was time to give it to you." I felt a cold ripple down my spine. I slid the papers out and saw William's handwriting covering page after page. His voice came through with such clarity that I felt as if he were standing in the room again. Helena began pacing. She spoke quickly, as if every second mattered. "Your uncle knew something devastating about your father. He knew about illegal transfers connected to international arms deals. He traced some of those transactions back to Lowell Holdings long before your mother uncovered the same patterns. But there was more. He also suspected your mother's death was not an accident. He had documentation from a private investigator. He told me he feared your father would silence him the same way." My stomach tightened. The journal entries in the earlier chamber had hinted at this, but hearing Helena speak it aloud made it feel brutally real. John stepped closer to Helena, his voice steady. "How did William know to trust you?" Helena stopped pacing. Her expression softened, touched by something deeply personal. "He saved my career. I was working on a case that put me in danger. He warned me, helped me find evidence against a corrupt senator, and told me that someday I would have an opportunity to return the favor. I never expected it to involve this." She motioned toward the papers in my hands. "But the timing is not random. Your father's influence has been growing more aggressive. From the moment he decided you were no longer valuable to him, he removed any protection you once had. He may already know that the trust activated. That is why I came. I also brought someone else." Before I could ask who she meant, her phone vibrated. Her face changed instantly. Fear tightened her jaw. She put the call on speaker, and a young voice filled the room. "Mom, they are outside. I do not know where they brought me, but I can hear them. I heard the name Trent. Please come get me." A sharp crack came through the line, muffled shouting. Then the call went dead. Helena cried out and grabbed the table to steady herself. Her son, Aiden? I remembered seeing his picture online once when she wrote a piece about school safety. A boy with sandy brown hair and a shy smile, only 17. I reached for her shoulder. "What happened? Who has him?" Helena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and tried to speak. "Marcus Trent. He has been Reginald's private enforcer for years. He handled the intimidation tactics Lowell Holdings needed to silence whistleblowers. If he is involved, your father knows far more than we hoped he did." John immediately moved to the wall panel and pulled up the external feeds. The vessel from earlier still hovered near the southern cliffs, but its angle had changed slightly. It appeared more deliberate now, like it was waiting for a signal. The tension in the room thickened. Helena backed away from the table, her breath shaking hard. "I never should have come. I brought danger here. They took my son because they knew I held evidence. William trusted me with this. I should have protected it better." I walked to her and took the envelope from her trembling hands. "You did protect it. You brought it here. This island was built to guard what the world was not ready to hear. You did exactly what William hoped you would do." She looked up at me with eyes filled with grief and guilt. "Marina, they will use him to force me to give them what they want. They will threaten him until I comply. That is why Trent took him. He intends to trade his life for the evidence. John turned from the panel. His face was tense. If they believe we have the full testimony, they will escalate their approach. But they do not know yet that only the rightful heir can access the deepest files. I glanced at Helena. There was an unspoken agreement that neither of us needed to voice. A mother will walk through fire for her child. And I was walking through the fire of my own past, whether I wanted to or not. I asked John what we needed to do next. He gestured toward a corridor that branched from the chamber. There are deeper rooms where your mother and William stored the highest level records. If we can access them, we may find something that stops Trent from acting quickly, a bargaining tool, legal documentation your father cannot refute. But to reach that chamber, we need both your key and your mother's identification markers. I touched the pendant inside my pocket. Elias had given it to me years after my mother died. A small locket she used to wear with a tiny fragment of pressed wildflower inside. I never imagined it had a purpose beyond sentiment. Helena took a steady breath and pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Tell me how I can help. John motioned for both of us to follow him. We moved down a narrow stone hallway, the walls lined with lanterns that cast long shadows. The air grew cooler the deeper we walked. The castle felt like a labyrinth built not just for shelter, but for strategy. Designed by people who understood danger long before we arrived. When we reached the end of the hall, John stopped at a steel-reinforced door. This is the first threshold. The proof your mother left for you is behind this door. If we find what we need, we may gain enough leverage to keep Trent from harming Aiden. I felt the weight of Helena's hope behind me. John pressed his palm to the panel beside the door. A soft green light blinked. Marina, he said, it needs your confirmation. I stepped forward. My hand trembled as I lifted it, but I pressed it to the panel anyway. The light shifted to gold, then to white. The door released with a slow, heavy sound. Cool air swept out from the chamber. Lights flickered on, illuminating rows of metal cabinets, sealed cases, and a central table marked with etched patterns identical to the ones on my key. Helena whispered behind me, "Your mother built this." I walked inside, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. The chamber was silent, but I felt my mother's presence in every detail. Her handwriting labeled the drawers. Her symbols marked the documents. She had prepared each piece carefully, like she believed I would one day have the strength to stand here. I touched the nearest folder and felt a shiver move through me. Behind me, John and Helena waited, their breaths as still as the thin air in the room. I exhaled slowly, knowing this was only the beginning. The folder felt warm in my hands, as if the weight of it carried everything my mother had tried to protect. I set it on the central table and opened it slowly. Inside were handwritten notes, dates, financial statements, and a small velvet pouch sealed with wax. My name was written on the front in my mother's handwriting. The sight of it made my breath hitch. I slid the pouch aside for a moment, unsure I was ready for whatever she had left inside it. John stepped closer, but remained silent, giving me room to move at my own pace. Helena hovered near the doorway, arms folded tightly across her stomach, her face pale with worry. Her son was out there somewhere. Time was stretching too thin. I pulled out the top sheet of paper and scanned the lines. My mother had listed locations, meeting dates, and her suspicions about shell companies tied to Lowell Holdings. Names I did not recognize sat beside transfers that made little mathematical sense. She had circled several entries and written a single note beneath them. Someone is redirecting funds away from Coronado. William believes my husband is involved. If this is true, our daughter will not be safe. My throat tightened. I felt John's steady presence beside me and knew he had seen these records before. He lowered his head slightly as if respecting the grief behind my silence. I turned to the next set of documents. They were correspondence between my mother and William, some typed, others handwritten. In one letter, my uncle had described a contract proposal my father had attempted to push through. He warned that if approved, it would dissolve the island's independent charter and allow Lowell Holdings to claim Coronado as an asset. A single line sat at the bottom in William's handwriting. Protect Marina from him if something happens to me. I pressed a hand against my chest. The chill inside me spread. Helena stepped forward and placed her fingers lightly on the table. Her voice trembled. Your uncle told me he feared your father was crossing into dangerous territory. He believed someone else was helping him. Someone outside the family. I never learned who. Before I could respond, John moved toward the far wall and opened another cabinet drawer. Inside lay a series of sealed envelopes, each marked for different stages of the succession. He handed me one labeled Secondary Access. "This one requires your mother's markers," he said. I reached for the locket inside my pocket. The pressed wildflower inside it had grown fragile over the years, but my mother's warmth still lingered in the metal. I placed the locket into the slot at the front of the table where an indentation waited. A soft white light pulsed through the etched markings. The drawers along the walls unlocked one after another with a low hum. John exhaled. "Your mother wanted you to see the full scope of what she uncovered." I opened the newly accessible drawer closest to me. Inside lay a small binder containing a private investigator's report on the night of my mother's death. The details were clinical and cold. Skid marks that did not match her driving pattern. No alcohol in her system. A failed brake component that had been replaced only days earlier. The final line stopped me. Possible deliberate tampering? I closed the binder and pressed my palms against the cool surface of the table. My breath shook. The truth was no longer something to fear. It was something I needed to carry. Helena's voice broke the silence. "There is more. I have to tell you something. William believed your father made a deal with an arms broker headquartered in Nevada. The contract was meant to pass through Lowell Holdings as a shell. If Coronado lost its independent status, the island's protected land could be used as a staging ground." I looked up sharply. "Staging for what?" Helena swallowed. "For storage, transport, movement of materials no company wants traced." I felt something cold turn inside me. The island that my mother fought to protect was not only valuable, it was strategically dangerous in the wrong hands. My father had never wanted an island. He had wanted a foothold. John approached the panel on the wall and activated the external feed again. The vessel remained near the southern cliffs, but now the angle of its bow was straight toward us. The movement was slow, deliberate, like a predator studying its prey. John spoke quietly. "This is not a passing boat. They are waiting for a signal." Helena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She flinched before pulling it out. Her hands shook as she tapped the screen. A video message began playing with distorted sound. Aiden's face appeared. His cheek was bruised. He looked terrified. "Mom, they want the documents. They said they know where you are. Please, I do not want to die." Static cut him off. The screen went black. Helena pressed both hands to her mouth, a low cry escaping her. I reached her side and held her shoulders until the trembling eased enough for her to breathe again. John stepped forward, eyes sharp. "We need leverage. Something that stops Trent from using the boy as a bargaining chip. If we can find evidence that ties Lowell Holdings to criminal activity, we can force them to hesitate. They will not risk a federal investigation." I turned back to the table and opened the velvet pouch my mother had sealed. Inside was a small metal disc the size of a coin. It glowed with faint blue light along the edges. I held it up, confused. John's breath caught. "That is the access key for the Royal Vault. The final chamber. It holds records your mother and William sealed together. Neither of them accessed it alone. It requires the key you carry and the marker you just used." A low rumble echoed through the walls. The lights flickered. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Helena looked around in alarm. "What was that?" John listened carefully before answering. The southern tower picked up a disturbance in the water, possibly sonar mapping. "They are testing our defenses." My pulse quickened. Everything was accelerating. There was no more time to stand still. John placed a hand on the table. "Marina, if we access the final vault, you will become the fully recognized heir by the island system. Anyone monitoring the island's signature will see the activation, including your father." I looked down at the metal disc in my palm. My mother had held this. William had trusted it. And whatever waited in the final vault was the truth they died to protect. Helena spoke softly behind me. "If that vault holds anything that can save my son, you have to open it." I met her eyes. I saw fear, yes, but also strength. A mother willing to stand in front of a storm for her child. John stepped to the side door leading deeper into the castle. "The vault room is below. It will take us a few minutes to reach it. Once we activate it, everything changes." I closed my fingers around the disc until its edges pressed into my skin. I nodded. "All right, show me the way." Helena wiped her face and steadied herself. John opened the door. The hallway beyond descended into dim light. and the air turned colder with each step. It smelled like stone and history, and something ancient that had been waiting for me longer than I had been alive. As we moved downward, the faint hum of machinery echoed along the walls. Somewhere beneath us, the heart of the island was waiting, and above us, danger was circling closer every minute. We reached a landing where another door waited, this one sealed with a silver panel identical to the one in the succession hall. John stepped aside. "This is where it begins, Marina." I lifted the disc, and then I placed it into the waiting slot as the chamber lights flared white around us. The light surged around us in a slow expanding circle, and a low vibration traveled through the floor, rising up my legs until it settled beneath my ribs. The door in front of us responded to the disc as if recognizing something buried in its memory. A thin line of white light traced the edges of the panel, then split down the middle with a deep mechanical breath. John stepped closer, but did not move ahead of me. I could tell he wanted to, but he kept a respectful distance, letting me lead. Helena stood just behind us, one hand pressed against the wall as if bracing herself against everything she could not control, everything she feared she might lose. When the door finally opened, the air that drifted out was colder than anything in the castle. It carried the stillness of a place untouched by time. The chamber beyond was carved into the rock with meticulous precision, smooth walls curving inward like the inside of a shell. A single table sat at the center, lit from above by a narrow beam of soft blue light. It was empty except for a sealed glass box about the size of a shoebox. I walked toward it slowly, hearing nothing but the soft echo of my footsteps. John kept a few paces behind me, scanning the walls as if expecting hidden sensors or some older defense mechanism to activate. He was careful but calm, and when I glanced at him, he gave me a small nod that told me he trusted I could handle whatever waited inside that box. I reached the table and rested my fingertips lightly on the cold glass. Etched into the top were two initials, MH. My breath caught. My mother had sealed this. I whispered her name under my breath, a name I had not spoken aloud in years. John leaned closer but did not interrupt. Helena stood frozen near the doorway, her face tense, her eyes darting between the box and me. I lifted the glass cover. It moved easily, as if it weighed nothing. Inside lay a small leather book, a USB drive, and a folded sheet of paper held shut with a faded red ribbon. My fingers brushed the ribbon, and for a moment I could almost feel my mother's hands over mine, her warmth, her certainty, her gentle strength. I opened the folded sheet first. Her handwriting flowed across the page in soft looping lines. "Marina, if you stand where I once stood, then the truth has found you. What we uncovered was larger than your father, larger than this island. This vault holds evidence that cannot be erased. Trust the man who guards the island. Trust the woman who brings the truth. But trust yourself most of all, because you will face a storm none of us survived." The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. I held the paper close for a moment before setting it aside. John reached for the USB drive, turning it over carefully in his hand. "This is not ordinary storage. This looks like a secure archival key, something only federal investigators or private intelligence networks would use. If William and your mother created this together, it means the contents are critical." Helena took a shaky breath. "Critical enough to save my son." I looked at her, seeing her fear layered beneath her determination. I understood it. If I were in her place, there would be nothing I would not do. I opened the leather book next. The pages were filled with diagrams, maps of the West Coast shipping lanes, financial trails connecting Lowell Holdings to companies whose names I recognized from news reports about trafficking and weapons distribution. My mother had mapped everything. She had tracked meetings between my father and a man identified only by initials. She had even noted dates where she believed money had been exchanged under the guise of environmental grants. At the back of the book was a list of names. Some were scratched out, others circled heavily, and one had a single note beside it. "Protected by Coronado." I met John's eyes. "This island was never just land. It was leverage." John nodded. "And it was the one thing your father could not legally seize. Not without you." Before I could respond, an alarm pulsed faintly through the castle walls. Not loud, not urgent. Just enough to send a ripple of dread up my spine. John pulled out his small communication tablet and scanned it. His jaw tightened. "There's motion at the southern dock. A small craft just detached from the vessel. It is heading toward the maintenance inlet. They found a way past the outer defenses. Helena let out a thin breath. They're coming inside. John turned to me. We need to move. We have what we came for. That vault will lock behind us once we leave, but if they reach this area before it closes, they will try to force it open. I gathered the leather book, the note, and the USB drive into my hands. My mother's message felt warm against my palm. Helena backed toward the door. Can we get to the east wing before they intercept us? John shook his head, not without risking a confrontation in the lower halls. We need to take the northern stair. It is narrower but easier to defend if they pursue. I could hear the faint rhythmic thud of footsteps somewhere in the distance. They echoed through the tunnels faintly, distorted by stone. I closed the vault and stepped away as the door began to seal itself. The lights dimmed one by one until the chamber fell back into complete darkness behind us. We moved quickly down the hall, John leading, Helena close behind him, and me following with the documents pressed tightly to my chest. The corridor curved sharply, and the sound of the sea grew louder. Waves crashed against the rocks below, sending vibrations through the stone. We were halfway up the northern stair when John lifted a hand sharply, signaling us to stop. Voices drifted up from the bottom of the staircase. Male, steady, unhurried. They knew exactly where they were going. Helena pressed against the wall, eyes wide. How did they get this far already? I thought they would need time to breach the lower barrier. John whispered. Someone gave them a map. The idea hit hard. And fast. The only way anyone outside the island could know the maintenance passages or the old war tunnels was if my father had given them the layout. He had every blueprint, and he had known I would come here eventually. John leaned toward us. We move on 3. Quiet. And stay close behind me. They are not here for a negotiation. I nodded. Helena swallowed and nodded too. John moved first, swift and silent. His steps were practiced, controlled, almost soundless. We reached the upper landing without stirring enough noise to alert the men below, but I felt the air shift behind us. They were climbing faster now, hunting. When we reached the side corridor leading to the rear vestibule, John motioned for us to follow him through a narrow archway cut directly into the rock. We slipped inside just as shadows darkened the stairwell behind us. Helena whispered, "They are too close." John pressed a finger to his lips and studied the old metal door ahead of us. It looked rusted, unusable, but he reached under the hinge and pulled out a hidden lever. The door shuddered before unlocking with a quiet metallic sigh. He opened it only enough for us to slip through. Inside was a narrow passage carved into the cliff, lit only by a faint natural glow that came from the far end. It smelled of salt and old cedar. The wind whistled softly through cracks in the stone. "This leads to the observation tower," John whispered. "They will not expect us to go up instead of out. Once we reach the tower room, we can lock down the upper level and contact the mainland directly." I clutched the documents tighter. "And the evidence?" John looked at me, steady and certain. "We keep it with us. Whatever happens, it cannot fall into their hands." We moved deeper into the passage. The air grew colder, the wind louder. Behind us I heard the faint metallic scrape of a weapon against stone. Helena stiffened. "They know we are up here." John increased his pace. Then we reached the tower before they do. We emerged onto a small landing, and for a moment the wind swallowed all other sound. The sea stretched out in every direction, gray and endless, waves smashing against the rocks below. A narrow set of steps spiraled upward toward the tower room. John gestured upward. "Go, now." I lifted my foot to the first step when a voice echoed behind us, polite and mocking. "Going somewhere, Marina?" I froze, my blood turned cold. I knew that voice. Trent. Trent stepped into the landing as if he had been taking a quiet evening stroll, not stalking us through a fortified island. His suit was immaculate despite the climb, his expression smooth as glass. 2 men flanked him, both armed, both watching us with patient calculation. The wind rushed through the open passage behind us, whipping my hair into my face and carrying the taste of the ocean onto my tongue. John shifted slightly, placing himself between us and Trent. His stance was firm and ready, even though he carried no weapon. Helena pressed her back to the wall, her breath shallow, hands trembling. I felt the weight of the documents in my arms. My mother's truth, William's warnings, everything Trent wanted. Trent smiled, polite and cold. "Good to finally see you up close. Your father seems to think you are becoming a problem." I wanted to see for myself. I swallowed the tightness in my throat. Where is Aiden? Trent lifted an eyebrow. Safe, for now. I take excellent care of leverage. Helena made a small sound, half cry, half fury, but John reached back subtly to steady her. Trent looked around the narrow landing with mild amusement. This island always felt theatrical to me. Too many secret rooms and hidden doors. Charming in an old-world way, but inconvenient when you need something quickly. John's voice was low. You should not be here. Trent's smile sharpened. Yet here I am. I am very good at getting into places people say I should not be. His eyes slid to the folder in my hands. And it looks like you found what I came for. I held the documents closer. None of this belongs to you. Everything that threatens Lowell Holdings belongs to us. Including you, Marina. He took a slow step forward. John shifted immediately. Do not move another inch, John warned. Trent tilted his head curiously at him. Loyalty, admirable. Pointless, but admirable. He nodded toward his men. Both adjusted their grip on their weapons. My voice felt too tight in my chest. If you hurt him, if you hurt any of us, the federal investigation will widen. You know that. Whatever is in this folder will be public. Trent's eyes glimmered with quiet amusement. You think I am afraid of public records. I do not need to erase evidence. I only need to control who lives long enough to present it. Helena gasped softly. You are just like my father, I said. Trent chuckled. No, your father is emotional, impulsive. I am simply efficient. The wind roared through the cliffside passage again, louder this time, as if urging us upward. The steps to the tower waited behind me, narrow and steep. If we could reach the top, we could lock the door and activate the emergency beacon. But Trent was too close now, too controlled, too ready. He extended his hand slightly. Come here, Marina. Give me the folder. We can discuss the rest later. I shook my head. There is nothing to discuss. Trent sighed, disappointed. Then we do this the difficult way. Before he could gesture to his men, John moved. It was not a reckless lunge, but a calculated strike. He swept toward the nearest guard, knocking the man's weapon aside and slamming his shoulder into him with enough force to send him sideways against the wall. The second guard raised his gun, but John drove the first man into him, tangling their movements. Helena screamed. Trent cursed and stepped backward to avoid the collision. The narrow landing worked to our advantage. There was little room for all three men to move freely. Go, Marina, now, John shouted. My body reacted before my mind did. I grabbed Helena's arm and pulled her toward the stairwell. She stumbled but followed. The folder pressed hard against my ribs as I climbed. I heard John grunt below us, heard fists strike stone, heard Trent bark orders in a low, furious voice. Helena panted behind me. He cannot hold them off. Just move, keep moving. The stairwell spiraled sharply, carved into the rock with old chisel marks still visible along the walls. The wind cut through narrow slits in the stone, carrying the ocean's roar with it. The tower room appeared above us, a shadowed circle of stone and glass. As we reached the final steps, a gunshot cracked below. Helena froze. I turned and grabbed her face between my hands. Helena, look at me. John told us to go. We have to trust him. Her eyes were wet and wide, but she nodded. We reached the tower room and slammed the heavy door shut behind us. The lock clicked automatically, followed by the deep clank of secondary reinforcement. The tower felt colder, the air sharp and thin. The walls were lined with narrow windows and old maritime instruments, relics from the island's chartered history. Helena collapsed into a chair, shaking. You think John is alive? He is strong. He knows the island. He will find a way. It was half truth, half prayer. I did not allow myself to imagine anything else. I moved to the central console. The surface was dusty, but the lights flickered when I touched the activation panel. This room should link to the mainland emergency channel. Helena stood beside me, gripping the table. Turn it on. Hurry! I inserted the USB drive into the console's port. The screen brightened with pale blue. My mother's initials appeared for a brief moment, then faded into a secure login window. Helena whispered, "That is her encryption." I typed the passphrase my mother had written in her letter. The console accepted it instantly. Files populated the screen, the book, the contracts, the maps, the evidence. A deep pounding echoed from the stairwell. They are coming, Helena whispered. I stared at the screen. If I transmit these files, it triggers a location beacon. They will know exactly where we are. Helena grabbed my arm. If you do not transmit, nothing changes. My son dies, and your mother's truth dies with him. My chest tightened. The pounding grew louder, metal on stone. The door shuddered slightly with each hit. I took a breath and pressed the transmission command. The console asked for confirmation. Helena whispered, "Do it." I pressed yes. The tower lights flared bright. A beacon at the roof began to pulse rhythmically. The files uploaded rapidly, line after line flashing across the screen. My mother had cataloged everything in brutal, careful detail. She had buried the truth here so I could set it free. A loud crack split the air. The door frame jumped. Dust drifted from the ceiling. They are breaking through. Almost done. The final progress bar crept across the screen. Helena gripped my hand tightly. "If we survive this, I will never forget what you did for Aiden." Before I could answer, another crack rang through the tower. The hinges bent inward. Stone around the door splintered. Trent's voice came through the impact. "Open the door, Marina. You cannot win." The transmission completed. The console flashed. "Sent." I exhaled slowly. "It is done." Helena looked towards the splintering door. "Then what happens now?" I met her eyes as another violent impact shook the room. "We hold our ground." The next strike hit with enough force to rattle the windows. A hairline crack spread across the wooden brace near the hinges, and a burst of cold air rushed into the tower room. Helena pressed both hands over her mouth as if holding back a scream. I felt my heart beat once, hard and deep, like it was warning me that the door would not last. Trent's voice came through the splintered gap, calm and infuriatingly certain. "Marina, you have 10 seconds to open this door before my men finish what they started." Helena whispered my name, pleading. I shook my head. The files were gone now. They were out in the world, in the hands of people who could not be paid off or threatened into silence. Even if Trent dragged me out of this tower, even if he destroyed every piece of evidence here, it would not matter. The truth had already taken its first breath. Another strike. The latch twisted. Screws popped from the frame and bounced across the stone floor. The wind outside roared louder than before, pelting the windows with sheets of salt spray that looked like moving smoke. Helena grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "They are going to kill us. Not if we hold long enough for help to reach the island. The emergency beacon is active." "How long will that take?" I did not answer. I had no idea. John's absence carved a hollow beneath my ribs. If he was alive, he would find a way to reach us. If he was injured somewhere in the stairwell, if he had fallen, if Trent's men had overpowered him, then it was just the two of us against 3 armed men and a locked door that was about to give way. The next blow knocked the top hinge free. The door sagged slightly. Trent's voice sharpened with boredom. Enough of this. He was done negotiating. I scanned the room with a racing mind. The tower had no hidden exits, no trapdoors or panels. It was built to withstand storms, not assaults. But near the far side of the room, slightly concealed behind a stack of old maritime charts, sat a metal crate. A faded warning label barely clung to its lid. "Emergency flare launcher." My breath caught. I hurried to the crate and dragged it toward the center of the room. Helena stared at me, confused. "What are you doing?" "Buying time." I forced the lid open. Inside lay a flare pistol, a handful of cartridges, and a small instruction plate bolted to the side. It was older than any flare system I had ever seen. The metal smelled of rust and salt. Helena backed away. "You are not going to shoot at them with that." "No, I am going to shoot through the window." Her eyes widened in horror. "We are 4 stories up. If I timed it right, the flare would launch toward the cliff's edge and ignite the external alarm siren." It was the only part of the island's defense system still operating independently of the main power grid. Trent's men slammed into the door again, and the bottom brace snapped. A thick crack shot across the center of the wood. Helena's voice shook. "Marina, we will not survive that fall. We do not need to jump. We just need to get their attention off the door long enough." I grabbed the flare pistol, loaded a cartridge, and moved toward the nearest open window. Cold rain lashed my skin. The tower swayed slightly with each gust. Another blow. The wood splintered. A boot appeared through the widening gap. I raised the pistol. Helena whispered a prayer under her breath. The flare exploded from the barrel in a burst of white fire. It streaked across the sky and disappeared beyond the cliff. We waited. For a moment, the only sound was the storm battering the windows. Then a deafening mechanical scream erupted from the cliffside alarm horn. The floor vibrated beneath us. The entire island woke with the sound. Helena covered her ears. "They know. Everyone on the mainland knows now." Trent shouted from behind the door. What did you do? The panic in his voice gave me a sliver of satisfaction. The final blow hit. The lock tore free. The door swung inward, slamming against the tower wall. Trent's men pushed inside with guns drawn. Helena pulled back against the far corner, shielding her face. I stepped between her and the men, even though every instinct screamed at me to hide. Trent walked in calmly, brushing dust off his sleeve as if he were entering a meeting room rather than storming a tower in the middle of a siege. That was a foolish decision. I tightened my grip on the empty flare pistol. He saw me holding it and chuckled. Planning to blind us with fireworks, he stepped forward. Give me the folder. You transmit whatever you want. I can still clean it up. But those papers in your hand are original, the real proof. Hand them over and maybe we can walk away without more bloodshed. I glanced at Helena. Her fear had shifted into something else. Rage and desperation, a mother who had been pushed to a breaking point. I looked back at Trent. There is no folder. His expression twitched with irritation. Do not insult me. It is in your arms. No, I mean there is no folder left for you to take. I destroyed it. He froze. You did what? I held his stare. Everything inside has already been transmitted. Destroying the hard copies was the only way to keep you from silencing what is already out there. His jaw clenched. Lies? His man approached me cautiously. Check her. He reached out to grab my arm. A voice cut through the air from behind them. Touch her and I break your hand. Every muscle in my body seized. John stood in the doorway, blood running down one side of his face, his shirt torn, breathing hard but still standing tall. His eyes were locked on the guard's wrist. Trent spun in surprise. How are you still alive? John's gaze sharpened. Bad luck for you. Before Trent could react, John lunged forward and slammed into the nearest guard, knocking the weapon free. The second man swung his gun toward him, but I reacted first. I swung the empty flare pistol with everything I had, striking him across the forearm. He cursed and lost his grip. Helena kicked the gun across the floor. The tower room erupted in chaos. Rain blasted through the broken door. Lightning lit the windows in violent flashes. The sea below roared like thunder. John fought with brutal precision, blocking a blow and driving the guard backward into the wall. The man crumpled to the floor, dazed. Trent backed away toward the doorway, realizing too late that he no longer controlled the room. This is not over, he hissed. He turned and bolted toward the stairs. John moved to pursue, but the tower shook violently as another wave crashed against the cliff. He steadied himself on the wall. Helena crouched on the floor, shaking, her eyes wide. Is he gone? No, I said. He will come back. He does not lose. That is not who he is. John wiped the blood from his jaw and looked at me. But neither do you. For a moment, I stood utterly still, breathing in the icy air, hearing the distant alarm blare through the storm. The truth was already spreading. Trent was running out of time, and now we would chase him. We rushed into the stairwell before the tower could shake again. The wind roared through the cracks in the rock, and the old stone steps trembled under our feet. John kept his body in front, scanning every landing before motioning us forward. Helena gripped my sleeve with one hand and pressed the other against her ribs, her breath shaky but determined. The emergency beacon still howled through the storm. It echoed across the island like a promise that help was coming. But I knew Trent was not going to wait for reinforcements to arrive. John paused at the next turn and listened. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling and slid down the narrow steps. Beneath that was another sound, faint but sharp, something metallic. He is heading for the private dock. He wants to escape before the Coast Guard reaches us. I tightened my grip on the railing. If he sailed off the island now, he would disappear into the mainland underbelly and take Aiden's fate with him. The files might have reached the authorities, but a man like Trent would find ways to twist the narrative or hide behind complex legal shields. If we lost him now, we might never get justice. We reached the lower landing, and a gust of damp air hit my face. I could smell the ocean and fuel. John pointed to a narrow tunnel carved into the cliff. That leads directly to the maintenance dock. We need to move fast. Helena's voice wavered. Do you think Aiden is with him? He needs leverage. I said, he will keep the boy close. Her steps quickened. I could feel her fear in the air around us. As we neared the end of the tunnel, we heard voices echoing off the stone. Trent's orders were short and impatient. Start the engine. Now. We are leaving. John slowed and held a hand up. He crouched near the edge of the exit and studied the scene outside. Rain poured down in sheets across the dock. The waves crashed against the pilings and the small security lights flickered in the wind. Trent stood near a sleek speedboat, shouting at the man inside the cabin. Another guard paced along the dock, his weapon raised nervously, and near the stern, shivering beneath a tarp, was Aiden. Helena gasped quietly. Her body moved as if she meant to run straight toward him, but John caught her arm. Not yet. Wait for my signal. The guard turned his back for one brief moment. John moved with incredible speed, sliding out of the tunnel and slamming into the man before he could react. The gun skidded across the wooden planks and fell into the water. I rushed out behind him just as Trent spun in our direction. Stop right there. His voice cracked with fury. He grabbed Aiden by the arm and pulled him close. The boy winced in pain. Helena cried out and stepped forward. Trent lifted a small pistol and pressed it to Aiden's temple. One more step, and this gets ugly. Rain streamed down my face. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack open. The storm swallowed the dock in a gray blur. John stood still, every muscle tense. Let him go, I said. Trent's laugh was short and bitter. You ruined everything. Do you have any idea what you have cost me? Years of work, years of planning, and for what? Some naive idea of truth. Your mother died because she fought a battle she could not win. You will die the same way. I felt something inside me shift, like a lock turning after sitting frozen for years. My mother's handwriting, the secret vault, William's final gift, the island rising to protect me. Every moment had led to this. No, I said quietly. My mother died trying to stop you, and I will finish what she started. Trent's grip tightened on the boy. He backed slowly toward the edge of the dock. His foot hit a coil of rope, and he stumbled slightly, but he kept the gun steady. One more word from you, and I will make sure the world pays for your defiance. Before I could speak, another voice cut through the storm. Drop the weapon. A Coast Guard officer stood at the top of the ramp with two others behind him. Their rifles were raised. A flashing light from their cutter painted the dock in red and blue. Trent shifted, panicked. Stay back, or I kill him. The officer spoke calmly. Son, you do not want to make this any worse. Trent's eyes darted between us and the officers. His face twisted with desperation. He backed another step. His foot slipped on the wet dock and Aiden cried out as Trent yanked him harder. John edged closer, his movements careful and quiet. Trent shouted, I said stay back! The boat engine sputtered to life behind him. Rain pounded louder, the waves surged. And then Aiden did something none of us expected. He jerked his head sideways and bit Trent's hand, hard. Trent yelled in pain. The gun dropped. The boy scrambled free. John lunged forward, sweeping Aiden behind him and driving Trent off balance. Trent stumbled against the rail, lost his footing and pitched sideways. His arms flailed in the air. The storm swallowed his scream as he fell into the dark water below. Helena ran to her son and wrapped him tightly in her arms. She sobbed into his hair, her shoulders shaking. John watched the water. After a moment, he shook his head. The waves were too violent, the current too strong. Trent had made his final decision the moment he pushed this far. The Coast Guard rushed onto the dock and secured the boat. One of the officers approached me. Are you Marina Carson? Yes. We received your transmission. Your files are already with federal investigators. An arrest order has been issued for everyone connected to Lowell Holdings. I felt my knees weaken. John stepped beside me and placed a steady hand on my back. The wind softened for a moment, as if the island itself could finally exhale. Helena led Aiden toward the officers. They wrapped him in a blanket and checked him for injuries. He clung to his mother and looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. Thank you, he whispered. I brushed his hair gently. You were very brave. We walked back up the dock slowly, the storm easing little by little. By the time we reached the upper path, the alarm had stopped. The beacon light faded. The island was quiet again. In the days that followed, everything changed. Federal agents arrived in waves. Statements were taken. Records were examined. News crews hovered offshore. Lowell Holdings collapsed under the weight of its own secrets. My father tried to distance himself, but the evidence tied him too tightly. He was arrested within 48 hours. Helena and Aiden stayed on the island for a while. John helped secure a new identity for them so they would not be targeted during the investigation. I spent long hours in William's study, reading every page my mother had written, every warning she had left. The grief came in waves, but so did pride. She had not died in vain. Coronado became something new, not a hiding place, a sanctuary. John continued as caretaker. I became its steward. People who needed a place to breathe found their way here, quietly at first, then steadily, as if guided by something larger than any of us. One evening I stood at the balcony overlooking the cliffs. The sea was calm, the sun set in a soft amber glow, casting long shadows across the waves. John approached and leaned on the railing beside me. You did what your mother wanted. You ended it. No, I corrected softly. We ended it. He smiled, small but warm. The breeze lifted my hair. The ocean breathed. For the first time in years, I felt entirely free. If you stayed with me through this entire journey, thank you. If Marina's fight and her search for truth meant something to you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections, your feelings, or what part stayed with you the most. And if you enjoy stories of resilience and justice like this, I hope you stay connected here so we can explore more together.